Well, g'day curd nerds. Today we're making Shropshire Blue. Now, Shropshire Blue was originally invented in Scotland, of all places, Inverness, Scotland, and its first name was Inverness Blue or Stuart Blue. Now, these names were changed for marketing reasons, and it was changed to Shropshire. Now, it had no affiliation with the county of Shropshire in England, but the name seemed to sell the cheese a lot better than it did Inverness Blue. So it was originally made in the 70s in Inverness, and then production soon stopped after a few years. It was then taken up again in the early 2000s by some dairies in Nottinghamshire, and it is still made there today. So this uniquely English cheese, some people say it's better than Stilton. I'm yet to see that because I've never tasted it, the commercial made version anyway. We will see how we make Shropshire Blue. It's a uniquely very orange cheese with blue veining throughout. You'll see during the process that it was quite difficult to get the cheese to form, but we'll see that as we go along. So let's get on with having a look at how I made Shropshire Blue. So I'm using Inglenook Dairy's unhomogenised milk for this cheese, and the ingredients are 8 litres or 8.45 quarts of whole cow's milk, 1.5 teaspoons or 7.5 millilitres of annatto. That's diluted in 1/4 cup of cool non-chlorinated water, 1/8 teaspoon of Mesophilic starter culture, either MA11 or MO30, 1/16 teaspoon of Penicillium broke 40 mould in 1/2 cup of cool boiled non-chlorinated water, 1/2 teaspoon or 2.5 mils of calcium chloride diluted in 1/4 cup of cool non-chlorinated water, 1/4 teaspoon or 1.25 millilitres of single strength liquid rennet diluted in 1/4 cup of cool non-chlorinated water, and you'll also need 2.5 tablespoons of non-iodised salt. So clip your thermometer on once you've got all your milk in, and the very first thing we do is not make a mess, but we add in the annatto solution. Now this is a lot of annatto, as you can see there. Just washing out my cup in the milk that had the annatto in it. There we go. Now this is going to be a very orange looking cheese. Now we're going to mix through the annatto now. Just stir that through your milk. Now remember that annatto doesn't impart any flavour into the cheese, it's just a colourant. And it's a natural colourant at that. So now we're going to heat the milk up to 31 degrees Celsius. There we are, 31 degrees Celsius or 88 Fahrenheit. Now that's close enough for my liking. Remembering that the pot will always heat up a little bit after you turn the heat off. So I've turned the heat off now. Now I'm going to add the Penicillium broke 40 solution and stir that through now. Just making sure it's evenly distributed through the milk. And now I'm going to get my Mesophilic starter culture and sprinkle that over the surface of the milk. It was a little bit stuck on the teaspoon, so I got that off. A tiny bit more for good measure. That was just a tiniest of a fraction. Now what I should have done before I put the starter culture in was take all the utensils out, but hopefully no starter culture is sticking to the spoon or the thermometer. Now we're going to allow that to rehydrate for just 2 minutes this time. So 2 minutes later, we're going to give that a stir and stir the starter culture throughout the milk. So next ingredient is the calcium chloride. Now I'm adding this a little bit earlier than normal, just to make sure that it does set a proper curd. I need an absolutely proper curd set for this cheese. So stir that through as well. Now calcium chloride adds back some soluble calcium to the milk to allow it to set a better curd. So we're going to cover that now and allow it to ripen for 30 minutes at 31 Celsius, 88 Fahrenheit. So this increases the acidity of the milk. So now that 30 minutes has elapsed, we're going to just give that a stir because the cream would have floated to the top. A bit hard to see, but I know it's there because I'm using unhomogenized milk. Just check the temperature. It's gone up a little bit, but that's okay. 2 degrees is no real problems. So we're going to add in the rennet to the milk now. This is the rennet solution. While stirring, just pour that in. And give that a stir for no more than 1 minute. And I'm just stilling the milk there, make sure it's not spinning around. Okay, we're going to cover that and let it set for 90 minutes at 31 Celsius, 88 Fahrenheit. So that's an hour and a half. So, hour and a half later, we're going to check for a clean break. Now, clean break is where we pop our knife in just a little bit and just pull it up, and you can see that's nice clean edges to that split. So I'm going to cut the curds into 2.5 centimetre or 1 inch columns. Now there are no horizontal cuts required for this cheese. So we're making it into columns. So cut one way and then turn the knife perpendicular and cut the other way. So pop the lid back on again. And we're going to let those curds rest for 3 hours at 31 Celsius, 88 Fahrenheit. Now it may cool down a few degrees, but normally milk holds its temperature very well. Okay, a lot of whey has been released just by waiting those 3 hours. Now we're going to use our strainer and we're going to remove the whey down to the level of the curds. So that's just a bit of an optical illusion there. So we're just going to ladle out all the curds. I'm just using a scan pan there, because that's what I had handy to hold all the curds. Oh, sorry, the whey. So we're taking that down to the level of the curds, as I mentioned, which isn't going to be very long, not far off. There we are, there's a big blob of curds that have shrunk. That'll do, and then we get rid of that whey. Now I tipped it down the sink. You can use it, but it's going to make a very awfully orange sort of ricotta if you did use it for ricotta or smoothies or what have you. So I'm putting my colander into a deep pan, and I'm going to put my normal loose weave cheesecloth over the top. Now this is so I can collect the whey and keep the curds warm during this next process. So just keeping that in that deep pan. Now we're going to gently transfer the curds into the cheesecloth, and we're trying to get the entire column in our ladle. Not cutting the curds horizontally or anything like that. We're just trying to get the big long columns look like big sausages of cheese. we place those into the colander for draining. Now, if you do cut the odd one or two, it's no big deal. Just means the cheese is a bit drier. So getting all of that out, and the last few bits I'll just tip in. Now the curd is a bit fragile because we didn't do any stirring or heating, which would seal the curds. Now we're going to let that drain for an hour and let it sit in its own way, and that'll allow the lactic bacteria to continue to consume the lactose in the cheese. Now I put a lid on it just to keep it warm. So we're going to discard the whey now. Don't need that anymore. Let's get rid of that. I'm just checking if it pulls away from the side. And it hasn't stuck to the cheesecloth, which is good. So we're going to grab opposite corners of the cloth and form a tight ball just by tying those up. There we go. So it's fairly tight. And we tip it over in the colander with the knot side down. This just adds a bit of pressure onto the curds, helps them drain a little bit better. So we're going to let that drain now for 1 hour. There's a close-up of the bag there of curds. So a fair bit of whey has been expelled, as you can see in the pan there. Just going to get rid of that. Don't need the pan anymore. Now we're going to untie the ball and we're going to turn the curd slab over in the cheesecloth. Now it should be fairly firm at this stage. Mine was, which was good. So just open up the cheesecloth. Now that sink area has been sanitised, so there's no issues of contamination or anything like that. It's a nice big slab there, so I'm just helping it turn over with the cloth. And it did split a little bit, but that's okay, it's no big deal. There we go. Now we're going to grab the corners again. And just tie that back up again. So we're going to put that back into the colander again with the knot side down again. There you go, nice and tight. And we're going to drain for another hour. There we go. That'll drain just straight into the sink. So that shrunk a fair bit again. So grab a chopping board. And we're going to unwrap the curd. Leave anything on the chopping board. Okay, I'm just spreading the cloth out. Now I'm going to cut it into 7.5 centimetre or 3-inch cubes. I'm just turning those just to inspect them. There's nothing too fancy going on here. Just making sure they're all cut all the way through. That's what I was checking for before the next stage. So we're going to transfer the curds onto mats on the draining board there, on the stainless steel draining board. And if you can, keep the curds at 27 degrees Celsius, 72 Fahrenheit, if that's possible. It was fairly warm in the kitchen that day, so it was about 25 Celsius for me. So we just lay all of those bits of curd onto the mats to allow them to drain a bit better. So over the course of an hour, we're going to turn the curds every 15 minutes. For the purpose of completeness, I have kept all these bits in. So we're going to just turn them every 15 minutes. Now, you may find that these do dry out a fair bit, and in hindsight, I probably would have only turned them twice because so much whey was coming out of them. It made the curd fairly dry, and that will become evident as we continue through the video. So even though the recipe that I found online stated I had to do this every 15 minutes for an hour, I would personally now only do it twice. So that's for 30 minutes. I would allow it to drain, because the surface of the curds become far too shiny, and they dry out so much during this process. It's like a basic form of cheddaring. So this is the third time, I think. Found that two-handed worked a lot quicker. I'm just going down row by row. Right, so that was the last time, and I'm just going to allow the curds to rest for 12 hours. Which will cool down to room temperature. Overnight, it cooled down to about 22 degrees Celsius, 72 Fahrenheit. I kept a cloth over them to keep them a little bit moist. I probably wouldn't dry them out for this long, probably 6 hours tops. I found that these were a bit too dry. So break the chunks of curd into quarters. You'll find it feels a little bit like poached chicken. Certainly not very moist inside, quite dry. Just breaking those into quarters there. Into a big stainless steel bowl. Just get all the bits in. Okay, and then I'm going to move on to the next stage, which is salting. Need to salt the curds before we transfer it to a mould. So we're using 2.5 tablespoons as per the instructions. Now we're going to add about a third. I put in a tablespoon to start with, and then mixed it and allowed it to dissolve. So sprinkle that all the way through over the surface of the curds. And then just with clean hands, just mix that through. Now it takes about 10 minutes for the salt to dissolve, so I just put a clean tea towel over the top just to keep any beasties off, and then grabbed the next tablespoon of salt and sprinkled that over the top, and then mixed that through until that was dissolved as well. Took about 10 minutes, put the cloth back over, and then take it off for the last time and add in the half a tablespoon of salt. It's a fair bit of salt in this cheese. So it's half a tablespoon, sprinkle that over and mix until that's dissolved as well. And it does release a little bit of whey, but that's okay. So what we're going to do now is get some wooden boards, or you can use chopping boards or whatever you've got. I put a sushi mat on the board and then put the mould on top. Now this mould seemed ideal at the time, and it probably would have worked if I hadn't dried the curds out too much. Now we're going to flip this like a big mould sandwich once a day for 5 days, and this helps the curds consolidate into a single mass. Now I found that it was quite dry, so what I did was add on between 1 and 2 kilograms or 2 to 4 pounds of weight on top. I've got a follower from a different basket that seemed to work okay to help it press down a little bit. In hindsight, I would have used a different type of mould, a mould with a bottom. Now after 3 days you'll see mould growth like that, which is pretty cool. I thought that I was very excited when that happened. And then after 4 days you'll see a lot more mould growth on the individual cubes themselves. Now those lines are from the bamboo mat, so nothing fancy going on there. Now the curds should shrink to about half their initial height over the 5 days. And now I put foil on top to keep any beasties out, because there was a bit of a gap between the follower and the cheese. So we're going to unmold the cheese now. And yes, whilst it did hold together, it was quite fragile. I noticed that when I turned it over for the first time. Now because it's going to require a bit of handling here in this next stage, I really wasn't satisfied with the structure of the cheese, but it should be firm, but have large cracks, and you can see there are certainly a lot of large cracks and a lot of blue mould growth, which is fantastic, seeing it's a blue cheese. So what we're going to try to do is, with a dull knife, dip it into warm water and smooth the surface of the cheese. Notice by me applying a little bit of pressure on the top there, starts to crumble, and this is not good. So I continued on. I just want to see if I could actually do it. It's not firm enough. Hasn't consolidated together during those 5 days. It was certainly still moist enough for a blue cheese, but it just didn't hold together. Anyway, I continued in earnest. And as you can see, the whole top is starting to fall apart. No good for anybody, especially not the Shropshire blue. About this time, I was starting to panic, as you do when your cheese just doesn't go right. I was trying to mould it, keep it together. Kim suggested I use some cling wrap or saran wrap and wrap it up and then push it together and see if that would work. Unfortunately not. It just did not work at all. In fact, I think I made it worse. And this is what happened when I unwrapped it. It fell apart. No good at all. So what's a man to do? And the only thing you can do is solder on. So we're going to fix this up. So out with a press and a cheesecloth lined mould. This mould is probably too wide for the amount of curds that I've got there. I should have used a narrower mould to get a taller cheese, and you'll see what happens in a minute. But anyway, put the curds into the mould. Now they are still quite moist, which is good. It was a good sign. I thought, yes, they are going to stick together once I pressed it a little bit. Not a heavy pressing, but I wanted to make sure that it certainly consolidated into a single mass. So there's the blue-orange curd packed into the mould. Looking lovely, of course. So I'm just going to fold the cheesecloth over the top. First of all, just pull it a little bit tighter. Now fold it over the top, put a follower on top, and I'm going to put it into the press. Now you can see how far down the curds are in that mould. Like I said, I should have used a narrower mould. Now I pressed at 12 hours at 11 kilograms which is 24.25 pounds of pressure. So that 12 hours, in my mind, was going to be enough to consolidate the curd. So we're going to remove the cheese from the press and the mould. And have a look. Now it's way too flat for a blue cheese. Really, blue cheeses really do need a bit of height. But it is stuck together. So I'm using that dull knife again, dipping it into the warm water and smoothing the surface of the cheese. And this just repairs any cracks that are present on the cheese, and that's keeping the blue mould in check instead of it running around rampantly. There's a bit of a close-up on my handiwork there. Yep, some of the sides were a little bit loose, but with the aid of the water and the knife, I managed to smooth those down so they stuck together. There were some fairly large crevices that I managed to patch up there. Hopefully yours goes a lot better. So that looks pretty good. So what we do next is we wrap that in cheesecloth, loose weave cheesecloth, a bit like bandaging a cheddar, and we're going to allow it to dry at room temperature. Now it should be fairly moist. Mine was fairly dry. It will dry out over 2 to 4 days, and you may even get some mold growth on top of the cloth. So we're just waiting until the cloth is actually touch dry. So once it is, just remove that from the cloth and place it in a ripening box. And we're going to age that at 12 Celsius, 54 Fahrenheit at 85% relative humidity. Now, here it is after a week. Just going to clean off the box there. Now we turn it weekly and make sure that that assists in even ripening. And just get rid of any of the moisture with a paper towel. It's either sitting in the bottom or sitting on top. You certainly don't want any water sitting on top of your cheese, because then that creates damp spots, which Brevibacteria linens likes to get into, which is an orange mold. Now this is 3 weeks after the pressing. Looking pretty good. Blue mold's got a little bit of Geotrichum candidum growing on there, which is fine. That's okay. It won't affect the cheese at all. A lot of blue mold in there. It looks really good. So here we are at the same 3 weeks. And it's held together fairly well, which I'm impressed with. So that's worked out. So after the 3 weeks, we're going to use a stainless steel skewer. I'm using the shaft of my dairy thermometer that's been sanitized. I'm going to pierce holes about every 2.5 centimeter or 1 inch apart and push all the way through to the bottom. Now, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. It actually put a crack into the cheese. I flipped it over, did a few more holes for good measure, and then again it started to crack again. So, bad decision. I thought, well, okay, the mold will just grow on the crack and that's all fine. So we're going to place the box back into the cheese fridge and age it for a total of 3 to 6 months. And don't forget to turn the cheese weekly and remove any moisture. Now, if you find the humidity's not high enough, put a wet piece of cloth in the bottom under the mat, and that'll keep the humidity up. Back to Gav. So you can see as I pierced it there, it did slightly crack, but this cheese is quite dry at the moment. Not so much that it's going to just disintegrate apart, but it should stay in its own shape as I turn it every week for the next few months, and then we'll get that classic blue veining. I think the cracks will probably add to the blue veining throughout the cheese. Anyway, thanks for watching this version of Shropshire Blue. As far as I know, it's not a protected cheese, so we can call it any name we like. But I'm really looking forward to the taste test for this one because I've never made something so orange before. It should be very unique. So before we go, don't forget that I have a course. It's called the Curd Nerd Academy, where you can learn to make amazing cheeses like this one. There are over 9 cheeses on offer, plus the basics, all the equipment you need, how to make cheese, the process of cheese making. That's all over at courses.littlegreenworkshops.com.au. And check out the Curd Nerd Academy for the beginner's course. Now, if you want to buy the kit for this cheese, I could highly recommend the blue cheese kit. Got a few of those in store at the moment. Also, don't forget that the show is supported by you, the viewer, via Patreon and YouTube memberships. Keeps it running and more cheese making videos flowing. Well, thanks for watching, Curd Nerds, and I'll see you next time.